And now to discuss clean energy, here's the co-founder of CleanCapital, John Powers, GW professor and president of the Stella Group, Scott Sklar, vice president for energy policy at the Center for American Progress, Greg Dotson, Duke Energy's director of environmental and energy policy and sustainability, Diane Denton, and our moderator, director of GW's Solar Institute, Amit Ronen.
All right. Thank you all for being here. This is a great panel, as you, audience, I hope will see. So we have solar energy has increased 30-fold, and wind energy has doubled since President Obama took office in 2008. Our nation was importing 50% of our oil in 2008. Now it's only 1 in 4 barrels of oil. And President Obama has enacted more energy efficiency standards than any other president combined. So it's, what are we, a few weeks away from a new president, right? And so traditionally, when there's a changeover in administration, there's also a big changeover in energy policy. So that's like what I'd like to focus on today. Look back over the last 8 years. Think about this administration has really emphasized clean energy and has used, as this audience knows better than most, a number of tools that they have at their disposal to boost clean energy, both within the executive branch and the economy as a whole. And then I'd like to spend a couple minutes at the end of our time together talking about what a future administration might change or have different priorities. So we're honored today to have such a high-powered and diverse panel. All these folks you're looking at today were instrumental in implementing many of these administration's policies, and they have a unique perspective to share with you. Let's start with executive orders. The folks here know better than most that the U.S. government is the largest energy user in the country. The administration has used executive orders extensively to push the envelope to show that the U.S. government is a leader in many ways when it comes to clean energy. Notably, the March 2015 executive order, which we discussed extensively last year, for example, requires in the clean energy space that the federal government get 30% of its electricity in buildings from renewable sources in 2025. So I'd like to just kind of open it up a little broadly and hear from each of you how important you think these executive orders have been. How effective have they been in advancing clean energy? Let's start with John. John was in the catbird seat for a lot of this.
Yeah, intimately familiar with the executive orders. You know, the great thing about the executive orders is they just pointed folks in the right direction, established goals, established metrics to manage them by. But the real change happened at the installation level, at the agency level, where folks were really pushing innovation. You know, it wasn't that the president said, go do this, so people went to do it. People were driving in that direction anyways, looking at ways for finding, whether it be putting solar on more rooftops or driving energy efficiency in buildings. And then I think what really began, at least in the last few years, which I think was really exciting, was the collaboration between what the feds were doing and what industry was doing. So you could talk to Walmart about their long-term power purchase agreements and learn about them. You can work with U.S. Green Building Council to look at different technologies, windows, lighting, HVAC, what was working in industry. And the thing that I think really is institutionalizing this moving forward was post-ARA funds, American Recovery Act funds, you know, people had to figure out how to do this with no money, right? And many of you are the ones that figured it out. But they looked at the different mechanisms to use their energy bills, whether it be power purchase arrangements, energy savings performance contracts, utility energy service contracts, tapping private sector innovation, using our demand in the federal government, or your demand now in the federal government, and bringing those two together. And that, from a political perspective, has tremendous bipartisan support. We got a letter from 143 members of Congress, more than half Republicans, saying how much they appreciated that specific program. I'm not sure the president has any other program that has that much bipartisan support. So I think that will continue to move forward, and it's driven a whole new world of opportunity where, you know, I'm from Buffalo, New York, so I always sort of put myself back there and know if the energy manager at the Niagara Falls Air Force Base may have never done one of these before in their entire life, one of these large contracts. But now you have the Federal Energy Management Program, you've got CEQ, you've got GSA, Corps of Engineers with resources to walk them through that process so that we're getting the most out of our dollars. And you have, some of the, I know our friends from OMB are in the room, and you've got folks in that team that may have not been as supportive before of these type of changes, seeing the effects that this is driving and hopefully institutionalizing some of that.
Scott, please.
Well, the good news, the administration has put out more executive orders on efficiency and renewables and waste and water efficiency probably than any other. The good news also is there has been an awareness across the federal sector. GSA has their energy proving grounds. The Army has issued its MATOC, which are these pre-approved contractors. It is generally easier to do efficiency and renewable projects. That has all been good, and there's a cascade effect in that state governments follow what the U.S. government does. And U.S. government's the largest owner of buildings in the United States of America. Well, state governments are number two. So what happens is a good thing. The failure at the moment is that we don't have enough training for procurement officials. So I get called all the time. I do a lot of projects for the Department of Defense and other sectors in the federal government. We have energy efficient equipment and great renewable energy, and it's certified and warranted, and we have certified installation, but we don't have a lot of the procurement officials up to speed yet to be able to take what's coming out of the private sector and what the facility managers or the building managers really aspire to through these executive orders. So, and that's not a fault per se, but takes time. But I think for a new administration, we'll get to the last, is we've really got to amp that up if we're going to really see the benefits.
Great. Greg, I'm going to give you a little twist on your answer. So Greg used to work in the House for many years, almost 2 decades, and was the author or key person in directing the administration on some of these clean energy goals right prior to the Obama administration. So how do you think that those legislative directives in military use of biofuels and on clean energy use in buildings also helped influence executive orders and what actions we're seeing?
Yeah, I think that government, all branches of government, the executive branch and legislative branch, have been sending a pretty consistent message over the last decade, which is that we need to be moving towards reduced pollution, higher efficiency, more renewable energy. And so in 2007, Congress passed a comprehensive energy bill, the Energy Independence and Security Act. Many of you are probably familiar with it. And it had a number of provisions about purchasing energy efficient products if you're an agency, boosting renewable energy, increasing efficiency, and then also thinking about was maybe less applicable to this crowd, but thinking about, well, how do we ensure that we're not going into the more greenhouse gas intensive fuels, and saying if we're going to do long-term purchasing of fuels, we need to make sure that that the greenhouse gases associated with those fuels are no worse than conventional gasoline. That has been preserved throughout law. Many attacks, it's a constant every year. There's an attempt by supporters of more greenhouse gas intensive fuels, whether it's coal to liquids or Canadian tar sands, to remove that provision, but it has remained in the law. And also an effort to reduce the carbon footprint of federal buildings going forward. And we're seeing successes of that. Many of you are familiar with the National Renewable Labs in Colorado, where they now have 5 buildings that are net zero. And that law would require that to be the standard for federal buildings by 2030. So that provision also is under attack. I think the natural gas industry says, why can't we just focus on efficiency and not focus on greenhouse gas emissions? And so we'll be watching the energy bill that's being debated in Congress on those issues. But I think that when you look at what's been, it's a very consistent trend. If you look at climate change and what science informs us, we're going to be going to the planet as a whole is going to really have to dramatically cut greenhouse gases further than it already has. And we've seen emissions decoupling from economic growth. In the United States, the economic growth between 2006 and 2014, I believe, was about 13%, while emissions dropped by 8%. And in the OECD, the sort of the developed world, we saw a similar statistic where we see GDP growing while emissions are reducing. That trend is going to continue. The U.S. has its own reasons to do it, but fortunately, we've reached agreement in Paris, and the entire world is on board, which helps reduce that, I think, political opposition in the United States to going forward.
Thank you.
Well, and from the utility perspective, I think, Duke Energy is very fortunate that we have a very large number of federal agencies within our territories in the United States. And we've certainly seen, without a doubt, these executive orders are driving demand for more renewable energy. Most recently, for example, 13-megawatt solar farm at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. We've done a 17-megawatt solar facility in Indiana for a naval station. That'll be operational in 2017. So whether it's power purchase agreements, leases, tariffs, or rates, we're absolutely seeing a drive from our customers.
Great. Okay, next question. John kind of mentioned it, and I don't think any look back on the last 8 years would be complete without what happened within a few weeks of the administration coming in, which is, of course, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, aka the stimulus bill. Many have cited that as the largest clean energy investment ever by the federal government, around $80 billion. Some people counted $90 billion, depending on what you count exactly. But there was a whole slew of stuff in there. So it was all designed to put money out there in the economy within 2 years. But obviously, there's a lot of lasting effects that I believe we're still seeing today. And so it was a bit of an experiment, of course, to this Keynesian dumping of money into these priorities. And so I think there's a lot of lesson learned there that I'd like to hear from you guys about. Anyone who'd like to start?
Well, I'd like to start just by saying, as the economy contracted, the real concern by many of us in the industry was that these young energy industries would also implode. And what the administration did was really brilliant for the parts of the industry that were driven by investment tax credits or production tax credits. They had cash in lieu of tax credits because when your economy's contracting, there wasn't a big tax. A lot of industries weren't paying taxes, or paying very low taxes because they were losing business. So in this way, you could get cash in lieu of tax credits, and actually, they said, okay, we're going to do the solar or buy from the wind farm or if you're a private investor, invest money in these things because we can actually get cash into our business by making these choices. The second thing they did was obviously spend a lot of time to extend these credits, expand them, and lastly, they gave out funds to state and local governments and gave them a chance not only to do general infrastructure projects, roads and all that, but actually reduce their energy bills through energy efficiency and renewables, which was a further market pull. And there were several other things in this portfolio, and I finished a net zero energy building at the Washington Navy Yard, which had used some of these funds as a teaching building for NAVFAC. And it allowed the federal sector to experience these technologies. I want to remind you, it's very hard to make a change in technology if most people have never seen the technology. So the more we get these distributed into the marketplace, the easier the decision making is, both in the public sector and in the private sector. So it was a critical linchpin. And one of the telling points of its success is the U.S. solar industry employs more than the coal extraction industry. And when I used to say this in the 70s, I was laughed at with scorn that would ever happen. And here I am alive, 40 years later, thank goodness, a lot less hair, a lot more gray, but the point being is it's true. And the jobs collectively out of the efficiency and renewable industries are huge and more geographically dispersed than the traditional energy industries. So it's a wider economy benefit. And that's a home run hit.
Okay, John?
Yeah, and I think it was, as you said, a linchpin, Scott, but also a sort of a steroid injection, right? Because
Yeah.
It was that push. Now there's so many different alignments that are going on, whether it be federal policy around climate change, whether it be clean power plant efforts at EPA, or state-level policy around things like net metering. You marry these things together, you've got the prices of solar panels dropping every quarter. You've got utilities that, in many cases, are progressive utilities like Duke making significant efforts to try to drive these things. And even the ones that aren't are sort of getting forced in this. We're in a transformational time for for energy delivering to your bases, your installations, your buildings. And that shakeup is happening not only because of that steroid injection, but because the policies have aligned and continue to align. There is obviously concern that could shift going forward, but I think the momentum is there, the financing is there. We get major corporations doing large-scale power purchase arrangements because there's an environmental impact for sure, but because they're also saving money, right? And they want on-site, secure power, and they want it so they can run their mission, right? Whether it be delivering or manufacturing facilities or the Postal Service delivering the mail, right? It depends on what their own mission is, but all those shifts are happening right now in the distributed energy space, and the American Recovery Act pushed a lot of that forward quickly.
I think the lasting effect of that law, I agree with everything the other speakers have said, but I think a lasting effect of that law is that essentially we have seen the cost of renewable energy and energy efficiency products just plummet. And that is going to have a market effect that will last into the future. We have a hesitancy about what the climate policy is in the United States. People wonder about the next administration. People wonder how far will we through policy try to drive those reductions. Well, you start to look at just from an economic point of view. Wind and solar is competitive in many areas of the country today with natural gas. And then you think about it, well, if you have a regulatory uncertainty, the safe bet is to go clean. And so the result is, as previous speakers have said, we have more employees in the solar installation industry now than we do in the oil and gas production industry as well. So it's a dramatic effect. And one of the coincidences that was very helpful was in 2007, Congress had set up this program for states to do planning around climate change and to figure out what their plan would be to cut emissions. They set up a program for smart grid installation and investment. And then when the Recovery Act came along, Congress funded it all. So putting $4 billion into smart meters, helping to deploy wind and solar. And so something that we have today that we did not have 10 years ago, really, 15 years ago, is that you can look, people see electric cars in the street. They are used to seeing solar panels on roofs. And once that change begins to happen, it's very hard to see how that turns back.
And I'll underscore that from a utility perspective and agree with what y'all said. From a business perspective, those grants have been vital. Duke has used those to modernize meters and do grid modernization in Ohio. We've used those grants to put rooftop solar in North Carolina. And one of our battery storage projects, the No Trees facility in Texas, 36 megawatt battery project where we're studying, how can batteries help smooth out the intermittency of wind. And those are projects that, absent these types of grants, may not have been economic, or they may have been just too expensive for our customers. And so really, both utilities and customers are benefiting from these programs.
Here, here.
Okay, I got a follow-up on that, which is, there's not many things, but one of the things Clinton and Trump agree on is
Tell me, I
world
missed
peace.
that whole thing.
No. Major infrastructure investment.
Oh.
No details on how to pay for it or anything like that. We'll work on that later. But, you can imagine that there might be a large program, another infusion into our nation's infrastructure, hopefully in the energy space as well. So I don't want to go necessarily negative, but we want to do lessons learned. So thinking about the stimulus bill, what could we have done better, or what could a next administration do better, perhaps, using a new cash infusion in the energy space?
Well, I'll start again by just saying, since I do a lot of infrastructure projects, critical infrastructure, both in government facilities and in local governments, obviously are energy dependent. And whether it's a storm or human error, a car hitting a pole. I did a study on squirrels bringing down the grid. I'm happy to share with any of you. I couldn't prove if the squirrels were hired by Al-Qaeda or not, but we lose a lot to squirrels. Of course, there's concerns about terrorism and cybersecurity, but the point being, quite seriously, is as we renovate and build out our infrastructure, integrating energy efficiency to reduce the loads of that infrastructure, because in many cases our tax dollars pay for it, and if not, we pay for it on our cell phone bills or whatever, and road tolls, that we not only can reduce the carrying costs of it, but we can actually make them absolutely resilient. And so not only can you make it resilient, meaning when the grid goes down, the signal lights work, the railroad crossings work, the cell towers work, the data centers work, the oil and water and fuel pipeline pumps work. But when you don't have a grid outage, they're reducing the renewables on those infrastructure, the carrying costs of keeping the infrastructure going, and the pollution and other kinds of problems. So we, in fact, need to not only look at putting money to upgrade our infrastructure, that's really important, but we have to do it the right way, the more resilient way, bringing in these new technologies that will, frankly, make us safer as well as reduce tax dollars. So that's my challenge to whomever steps into the office, is pay attention to detail. One of the candidates said details matter. They do. And this is really one that, in fact, high-value energy efficiency, energy storage, and renewables have a huge, important, critical contribution to.
I think, as is the case with so many of the policy positions of these candidates, you look at Secretary Clinton, and she has actually laid out prescriptive, proposals about what she intends to do, and she has proposed a large infrastructure project immediately after taking office, and Donald Trump has said, well, I would double that, and that's all we really know about his proposal. But I think from an energy perspective, it's important to just realize that the way infrastructure works is fundamentally different from some other types of infrastructure, where we have large public investments in things like ports and highways and airports. With energy, we do have direct federal investment in the facilities that all of you manage, but largely energy infrastructure is more a creation of policy and incentives, and so I think that gives you an opportunity to go much farther with a reduced amount of money. In the case of the smart grid program we were just discussing, public investment of a little more than $3 billion, and I think it ended up with an $8 billion investment when you leverage private investment into that. And so I think there could probably be even more of that. So I think one of the big lessons, or I don't know if it's a lesson learned, but it's a changed state, is that unlike 2009, we're now in a situation where there is so much more innovation. There's so much more capability to capitalize on the opportunities that are out there. And so if we were to see a kind of policy nudge and incentives for additional action, I think it could be even more significant than the Recovery Act.
Including things like green master limited partnerships, because that's a tax tactic to drive, pipelines and whatever, and grids. Well, that could be a green one that helped do what we talked about.
Instead of just spending the money, it's how is the money used wisely, maybe in a way to de-risk, whether it be microgrids, pipelines, and getting the market to put the money in, right? So you're spending less taxpayer dollars, letting the investors, there's a ton of cash sitting on the sidelines today looking for safe investments. And the government can help sort of de-risk some of those opportunities without actually having to spend money, but put money up front, right? Or put money as an opportunity to loan guarantee got a really bad, unfortunate slap during this administration, but actually it was a very highly successful program, right? Where we weren't actually putting a ton of money up front. We were backstopping these loans, right?
It's like a 2.5% default rate.
Yeah, crazy.
I mean,
any venture capitalists in Silicon Valley would kill for that return.
This is, though, it's an important area for Duke Energy. So our capital plan between now and 2020 is $30 billion in infrastructure. So we need it, right? We all recognize, and if you've got Clinton and Trump agreeing on something, it's going to be a pretty mainstream idea, that we need more infrastructure as a country. We need natural gas pipelines. We need to be more connected through the grid if we want to move renewables and clean energy from where they're generated to where they're consumed. So we recognize that. In addition to incentives, though, I absolutely concur. It needs to be done correctly. They need to be done sustainably. But I don't see money as necessarily the largest barrier. For a company that actually builds pipelines and trying to do interstate transmission lines, it's more around the policies we need around expedited permitting, being able to address the natural resources issues and concerns. These projects need to be done correctly. They need to be done sustainably, but it is incredibly difficult just to try and go through the other hurdles, even beyond just coming up with the money on the front end. So I do think the government could spend less, but do some streamlining to make it easier to do the projects if we really want to have some massive build-outs.
As effective as an influx of money would be, a federal energy bill of some nature that actually outlined some of these policies in a way that streamlined and got after these issues would be equally as effective, because it would unleash market money that's not there.
Boy, you're an optimist. Wow, very good.
But when the House and Senate shift too, we'll be in good shape.
I want to tease out one thing that you've all mentioned, which is the important role of the private sector, which I think has I wouldn't say morphed, but evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years, I think in a fairly positive direction. Of course, there's a larger clean energy transition that's happening regardless of what the government does. But how do you think the interactions between what the government does and the role for the private sector, what should the federal energy managers listening here learn about new tools that they could use to leverage what the private sector is doing?
Well, I was just in the Pentagon yesterday, and part of it was discussing tools the private sector uses at their facilities and makes decisions. In this case, it was on energy storage, and that they've been doing for the last 15 years, and the U.S. government's just starting to touch it. They can't figure out a value proposition. I go, wow, the private sector has figured out a value proposition. Yeah, they would retire old diesels and not have to train out diesel fuel and not have to deal with O&M and get rid of power quality equipment that really doesn't work anymore because the grid's old and the sag surges and transients are ruining digital equipment. And then, of course, you can arbitrage low rates and high rates. And if you put all that together, even batteries today are cost effective. So, why aren't you doing it? And so part of it is to have a more frank exchange in some ways. And again, that's why I believe training procurement officials is such a critical next step, so they understand what's already being done successfully in the marketplace and can therefore give them some decision tools and with their superiors on how maybe to look at these new technologies, particularly in how they blend together. There's some elegance in blending efficiency, renewables, and storage that you don't get by just having a PPA here for solar and an energy performance service contract here for efficiency, and maybe you lease the battery back. I mean, there may be some ways to aggregate procurement tools to get to where you want in energy savings, reliability, resiliency, and actually saving costs that always aren't on the energy budget. Power quality equipment goes bad, you don't pay for that on the energy budget. But it's critical because if you have computers or microprocessors, you have to have power quality equipment or some kind of power quality substitute. So these are the things we need to start looking at as these technologies evolve, become more sophisticated, and the private sector is the place to learn that from, frankly.
I think this is a great forum to start, right? I think that's the exciting thing about GreenGov is, and the FEMPIP forum up in Rhode Island recently, it's a great interaction between the feds and the community. I know Kevin Campshire, who's sitting up here at GSA, hosts something with these industry titans in the high efficiency building world, right? Whether it be green architects that are building the Bank of America building, which is the largest green skyscraper in the world in New York City, and how do we learn from that? How do we share ideas? And honestly, we as the feds have to be, or you as the feds, I'm no longer, but have to have to do. Sorry, have to do a better, not a better job. I think there needs to be better venues to have that conversation and be willing to share that conversation. And then going a little bit what Scott said, getting back to the budget side of it, right, which is really hard. And maybe we need some new authorities. There's got to be a way to look at some of this in a new way in the budget, because unfortunately, if you have different colors of money, once you get to the certain levels, they stop blending them, right? But in the reality, it's not about saving money, it's about the budget line, right? And that's unfortunate when you look at it that way. If you look at it, but it's also a lot easier for eBay to say, or PayPal to say, my data center has to be up. For every 5 minutes my data center's down, it's going to cost me X millions of dollars of transactions, so I can put that money into my economics. It's a lot harder for the Navy or for EPA or GSA to say, what's the financial implications of my mission going down, and how can I put that in the economics, right? That's a conversation that's still ongoing. I think the NDAA this year, for the first time, drives the Defense Department to look at that on the resilience side. But hopefully in the next administration, there'll be some more focus there to give the ability to do a microgrid power purchase agreement, to do an energy storage power purchase agreement. But right now, you couldn't do that within the current economics for the feds.
I think from 2008 to 2015, the civilian agencies cut their greenhouse gas emissions by about 24%, which is remarkable. And as successful as that was, when you add in defense, it's like 17 or 18%, but 24% for civilian agencies. And when you think about going forward, we're going to have to do more faster. And I think drawing upon, what are the tools, being creative in the kinds of initiatives that you come up with is really critical, because ultimately, I think we all have enough experience to know that when Congress wants to do something, when the White House wants to do something, they say, what ideas do you have? What demonstration projects have proven successful that we can now expand to other agencies? And that's really, I think, a really vital effort that all of you could undertake.
Yeah, I just encourage, for those of you that have your own challenges, partnering with your local utilities. I think, we're growing. We're hearing our customers want more. We understand the environment you're in. We're also faced with our own challenges. We've worked to reduce our CO2 emissions 28% since 2005. 40% of our energy now comes from carbon-free sources. We are getting incredibly creative to develop the types of comprehensive solutions. When a Google comes to us and says, this is what you've got to deliver, we have the best and the brightest working on how to figure out those solutions. So I would just offer us up as a resource for you as you look at these challenges.
And if I can build on that, here at GW, we have the Solar Institute that Amit runs, the Environmental Energy Management Institute. I see Professor Dotson out there. And they also have analysis and programs that can help fit in and answer some of the questions that might be certain deterrents. I find that there's a lot of little things that stall projects. I get called all the time. And a little information sometimes the right way can move things forward that can overcome some barriers so that a lot of you face.
I'd also just quickly, Scott, you've talked a lot about the acquisition world.
Yep, I've lost my hair because of that, I think.
Any government lawyers in the room? All right. Okay. Well, you guys know this better than anybody. Once you get into the legal world, it's not about providing advice. If you go in the private sector, the legal team provides advice, right? They say, this are your risks, this is how you address the risk. Here, in the federal world, it can just completely kill a project, right? And when you wait another 6 months, your financing is gone. The public sector is putting, the private sector is putting a lot of money into these development projects, and then they get stalled by a single lawyer who doesn't want to look outside their blinders. And that's an area that needs to be addressed, I think, going forward to really drive the innovation, right? It's going to be great to keep the same things we've got moving forward, but if we really want to tap into innovation, we got to go a little bit wider.
I think solar lighting to light up those lawyers would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just have just a very few minutes left, and I promised we'd have a discussion of the future.
Whoa.
Your crystal ball, because the the folks in our audience, they won't be changing over by and large with the administration, and they still need to be doing their public service and doing their jobs, and they'll want to know, well, what can I expect maybe differently, or what should I be prepared for? So a bit of a lightning round, but thoughts on what the future may hold with a different administration. We talked about maybe another slug of infrastructure investment dollars. Executive orders are great. They can be influential. They can also be turned over or changed completely by the next president. They're not law, and they're up to the whoever's in the Oval Office.
Well, some
to
of
decide.
us who are older and lived through many administrations, and you all probably have this experience too, it's rarely as much as the substance as the elevator speech. And so let's just say we move to a candidate beginning with T, that greenhouse gas emissions might not be the elevator speech, but resiliency would be. So part of it is, I've been pushing this stuff way before the word climate change ever came up. It made sense before we had to worry about emissions to changing our climate. So it makes sense now. And so what you're all doing is very important, but you have to frame it into the priorities of who is ever coming into office. Is that going to be hard, I think, with these set of issues? I do not believe so.
Okay. Anyone else want to?
I think there is going to be. I think there is a fundamental difference between the candidates, which I'm not here to do a political speech, but just
I was nervous to get into that, so I'm glad you are.
But just simply to say that you have one of them who is articulating a need to reduce greenhouse gases and increase efficiency and boost renewable energy with concrete targets and deadlines, and you have the other who's just made speeches to the oil and gas industry saying we're going to bring back all the coal jobs, we're going to align federal policy for sort of unfettered focil fuel production.
And solar and wind don't work.
And solar, it kills birds.
Right.
So,
kills birds.
So I do think there's a fundamental difference. I think I would, at this point, I think we should all watch the election with interest.
Anyone else? Okay. John?
Just quickly, keep doing what you're doing, because I think the things that have been successful is showing up in the cost side of things. So no matter what happens, keep talking about cost savings. That's going to be critical. In Clinton administration, I think you'll continue to be empowered and to move, as President Obama said, to continue to lead by example. So, hopefully there's not that much change here in the next few months.
All right. Well, please join me in thanking this great panel and for John. Always.